Marilyn Monroe's body was found in the bedroom of her Los Angeles home in the early morning hours of August the 5th, 1962. The police were summoned.
I received a phone call at approximately 3:45 a.m. from the doctor who told me that Marilyn Monroe had died from an overdose of sleeping pills. The house was relatively dark. I walked up to the house, entered the door, and I was shown into this bedroom. Marilyn was laying on the bed, face down. She was nude. A sheet was over the body. Numerous bottles were on the nightstand next to the bed. I was shown an empty bottle, which 2 or 3 days before, the prescription had been filled with Negutol. I was told that Marilyn Monroe had apparently swallowed all of the remaining pills in that bottle.
This account of her death has more holes in it than a piece of Swiss cheese.
Because most people think of Marilyn Monroe as sort of a ditzy blonde, a talented actress, but the FBI was following Marilyn Monroe, and there were people at the highest levels of the United States government who believed that Marilyn was a potential national security threat.
I mean, this is national security. We're not talking about rubbing out some nobody in Hollywood. I am convinced that Jim Angleton had her murdered.
Do you have any theory as to what happened in this instance?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
Marilyn Monroe was murdered.
I think somebody done her in.
I can't explain myself or defend myself without revealing things that I don't want to reveal. I feel like I can't, you can't turn around and say, well, I'll tell you this and I won't tell you that. It's a terrible position to have to say I can't talk about it because I can't tell the whole story. Listen, talk to Bobby Kennedy.
Sup sobers, testing, sup sobers. Okay. Sup sobers. Here's a little fun fact for you guys, because I know you love fun facts. May 27th, 1949. Marilyn Monroe, she was broke. She was now unemployed because she had been let go from Fox Studios, and she was getting kind of desperate. There had been multiple attempts from different photographers to take nude photos of her, because what would be better than nude photos of this gorgeous actress? But she always said, no way, like I'm not doing nudes, there's no way I'm doing that. She seemed really shy, and honestly, that should testify to how desperate she really was. Marilyn had done movies, she'd modeled before, she'd just never done anything nude like that, and she'd always rejected any photographer that asked. And this guy, Thomas Kelly, she'd shot with him before, and he'd always said, if you ever want to do nudes, like, let me know, let's do it. And she always said, no. But when she's desperate enough, she needs money for rent, food, car payment. Yeah, she hits him up and says, hey, like, can I maybe do those photos you were talking about? And he's like, oh yeah, definitely. She's like, well, do you promise that they're not going to recognize who I am, and like these photos aren't going to go everywhere, and like it's not going to tarnish my reputation? He's like, yeah, of course. And she's like, can you make sure that your wife is there, like so that it's monitored, the whole thing is above the waist, you know what I'm saying? And he's like, yeah, of course, whatever you need to feel comfortable, like that's what we'll do.
When I first asked her to do it, why she turned me down. She came back and said, I would like to do it.
But I always said, no, I don't do nudes, never. And then I got so far behind the rent, 4 weeks, and I was in debt and everything, so I called up and I said, are you sure they won't recognize me? He said, I promise. I said, well, if it's at night and you don't have any helpers, to put up the lights, and I said, I don't know. I said, I'm shy and I don't want to expose myself to, all the people you have. Then I said, and at night. He said, all right, just Natalie and myself,
So she agrees, and they take these amazing photos. Pretty simple. He just lays out a super big red velvet cloth, and she lays on that, and she takes these amazing nude photos, and nothing really comes of it after that. That is until sometime late 1950, early 1951, when he sells these photos to a Chicago calendar firm. They specialize in making calendars including different photos, a lot of pinup calendars, and they want these photos from Thomas Kelly for a pinup calendar. Marilyn Monroe was paid $50 from Mr. Kelly for the photos that he took. He sold these photos to this calendar company for somewhere between $800 and $1,000. Now, back in the 1950s, that's a lot of money compared to what it is now. But still, he definitely sold these photos for way, way more than what he had to pay for them. Marilyn was not really that big by this point. She was involved in a couple of small roles in different films. By 1951, nobody really knew the Marilyn Monroe name. By 1953, however, if you were tuned in last week, you'll know that 1953 is just, it's going to forever be one of those trigger years for me because I feel like a lot of stuff went down in 1953. One of those things would be the MK Ultra project. Another one of those things would be the creation of Playboy magazine. And we also have Marilyn Monroe getting really famous with her movie Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. It's around this time that this nude calendar starts to resurface and people start talking like, I feel like I know this face, but it's like a person with long dark hair. Her face is covered in most of them, so you can't fully tell. But eventually they realize, wait. This is Marilyn Monroe.
The calendar ultimately sold over 8 million copies.
It's the most famous calendar shoot of all time. They called it pornography back in the day. It had a little acetate over her, and it looked like she was wearing negligee, but you could lift it up and see she was nude beneath.
At that time, that wasn't really happening. Playboy wasn't quite a thing when this calendar starts popping back up. And so people were like really worried. Marilyn's PR team was like, you need to deny. And she's like, no, I'm just going to own it because it is me in the photos. And like, I needed money and it was either that or I don't eat and pay my bills. So that's what I did. Instead of it damaging her career and sinking her like everybody thought it would, her career took off even more. Sales of her movies spiked. She became way more popular because of how real she was, and probably because she looked so dang good in those photos. Now, like I mentioned before, in 1953, Playboy magazine also started. And if you tuned in last week, then you'll know that Marilyn Monroe was the very first cover/centerfold of the Playboy magazine first edition. And it wasn't even called a centerfold or a Playmate or anything at that point. It was the Sweetheart of the Month. The funny thing about these photos is that they just happen to be the very same photos on this calendar. They're all photos from 1949 from Thomas Kelly. So how did Hugh Hefner get a hold of them? Because obviously he didn't take new photos with her.
Marilyn Monroe had posed for these nude calendar photos, but almost nobody had seen them. You could not send nudity through the mail. So I drove out on North Avenue in my beat-up 1940 Chevy. He sold me the right to reproduce the nude image for $500.
So the Playboy empire was started on a $500 purchase of Marilyn Monroe's nude photos. Dr. Seuss? And so obviously she got paid out really well. She got super rich overnight. No, just kidding. She didn't get paid anything at all except for the $50 that she made when she originally took the photos. And if our assertion from last week is correct, and Hugh Hefner was in fact the original Epstein, and he was in charge of breeding and creating these MK Ultra sex kittens for use in these different blackmail operations. And if we consider that Marilyn Monroe was not only the first celebrity known to be involved with the MK Ultra program, but also considered to be the very first sex kitten. And keeping those things in mind, if we also recall that Marilyn Monroe was able to get extremely close with not only Bobby Kennedy, but also JFK John Jack Kennedy. Lest we forget that not even a year later, that President John Jack JF Kennedy was assassinated in Houston, Texas. And in addition, also too as well, Mr. Bobby Kennedy also assassinated in 1968. And keeping all of these things in mind, this case involving Marilyn Monroe's untimely passing has sparked speculation and controversy for 63 years. And Marilyn Monroe passed away when she was just 36 years. Might mean something, might mean nothing, but that was a little fun fact that I thought was very interesting.
Let's go.
Alright, okay, welcome back to Sobering Stories with your boy, DJ Petrovsky. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for joining me. I highly recommend that you watch this video and then go binge every single other video that I have made ever. If you're a returning subscriber, then I highly recommend that you go binge watch every single episode that I've ever made ever. If you didn't watch my Anna Nicole Smith video, then I would highly recommend that one. There is some info that'll overlap. You're not going to miss like everything if you don't watch it, but you should do it anyways, okay? It'll help, and it's a good video. This week, we have two sponsors. I want to highlight our sponsor from last week, Rendition Aesthetics, my neighbor Amy. Go check that out. Shoot her an email. If you're having any blemish issues, skincare, facial, whatever issues, hit her up. She can help you virtually. She is extremely successful, so hit her up. Sponsor number 2 would be We Subscribe. This is an amazing YouTube channel. It says and it claims to have the most elite subscribers on the internet, and I personally cannot get enough of this channel. I just think that these guys are hilarious. They are so much fun, and their ideas are amazingly creative. The storylines that they come up with literally make no sense and keep you on the edge of your seat. Why subscribe? Is that even a channel? Sounds made up. Let's check it out. Huh, yep. Sure enough. We subscribe to Why Subscribe.
Freaking dork. You subscribe to Why Subscribe, not We Subscribe.
Unforgivable.
So if you don't subscribe to We Subscribe, and you don't understand and appreciate the value and importance of a subscription and what it means to be a subscriber, then maybe you shouldn't subscribe to We Subscribe. But if you want to know what it's all about, then go check out the page. Thank you to Rendition Aesthetics, as well as the guys, the Subscription Brothers from We Subscribe.
We're Costco guys. Oh, we're the Subscription Brothers.
Now, I just want to start things off by saying that Marilyn Monroe's case literally gave me little glimpses and like mini flashbacks of so many different cases. I got a glimpse of Britney Spears with how much the media hounded her. I got a glimpse of Anna Nicole Smith because they looked identical, but they were also both addicted and poisoned with the same substances. I got feelings of Whitney Houston because of how she was slowly unable to even remember lines or successfully perform her acting or her singing or any of her roles. I got feelings of Brittany Murphy because of just how out of it she was and how sick she was. It gave me the same vibes I had when I talked about Elvis and how she's so connected with all these political figures for no apparent reason whatsoever. More than anything, I see what we could consider to be a blueprint for so many things that would happen in the future to so many different celebrities. One of the reasons that Marilyn is said to be a perfect prime candidate for the first sex kitten is because of her traumatic upbringing. She experienced so much trauma and she had such a rough upbringing that she was extremely vulnerable, which makes her a perfect candidate for being brainwashed into becoming some sort of CIA asset. But just like our story last week with Anna Nicole Smith, Marilyn Monroe was never born. She was created. Norma Jean Mortensen, however, was born on June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles, California, in L.A.
L.A. Thank you. L.A.
Coming in hot with another fun fact for you guys, Marilyn Monroe was born in 1926. Marilyn Monroe passed away in 1962. Might mean something. Probably means nothing. But Norma's mom's name was Gladys Pearl Baker, and she found out she was pregnant at the age of 26. Allegedly, her father's name is Charles Stanley Clifford, though it's said that it could be one of 3 different guys because, well, Gladys, I guess, was getting pretty busy. But he decided that he didn't want to have anything to do with the baby, so he dipped out, leaving Gladys to take care of Norma all on her own. Gladys struggled really badly with her mental health, and because she didn't feel like she could provide a good living situation for Norma, she decided to give her up for adoption, and she dropped her off at an orphanage, hoping for something a little better for her life. And this was when Norma was only 2 weeks old. Norma was given the last name Mortensen to avoid being labeled an illegitimate child, and this would have been Gladys's previous husband. She actually had the last name Baker from her original husband, and when she was old enough to be baptized into the church, her mom baptized her with the name Baker. So her name would be changed to Norma Jean Baker, though it was Mortensen on her official birth certificate. She was eventually brought in with foster parents Ida and Albert Bolendar, I think is how you say it, and they were her foster parents for the first 8 years of her life. But it made things really complicated because her mom still kept in contact with her, even though she was in the foster care system. She always wondered, why can't my mom just take over? And she made it even more difficult because she told her that she's not her mom, to call her Aunt Gladys. Norma said one of her earliest memories of her mom was actually being smothered by her with a pillow. You can understand that her mom seems to have some sort of mental imbalances, and that would come to fruition when she was 8 years old, when her mom would be committed to a psychiatric facility, and she'd be diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. This really worried Norma. Throughout the entirety of her life, she always worried that she'd become the same thing as her mom and end up getting institutionalized, so it never really went away. The other thing that never really went away was that she was essayed when she was 8 years old by a guy named Mr. Kimmel, maybe Jimmy Kimmel, I don't know, as well as a possible family member. After being shuffled through 10 plus different foster homes, she would eventually land with a friend of her mom's, and this would be the Goddard family. Everything seemed good with this family until 1942, and that's when they were planning to move across the country, and for whatever reason they couldn't bring Norma with them. So she was going to have to go back into foster care, but she really, really didn't want to do that. So they decided to set up an arranged marriage between her and this neighbor boy named James Dougherty, or Dougherty, I don't know. And the two of them got married when she was only 16 years old. But this would officially keep her out of the foster care system, so it was successful in that aspect. Unfortunately, it would not be a very successful marriage. Now, James Dougherty was a 21-year-old Lockheed aircraft worker. He worked the night shift. He would go on to work for the U.S. Merchant Marine, service. And essentially what they did was it was a civilian and government marine organization, but it left him traveling fairly often. Norma had dropped out of school so that she could be a full-time housewife. During World War II, James ended up getting drafted. Most of you guys will know that with all the men being drafted into the war, a lot of the jobs back in the U.S. were left unattended. So a lot of women had to step into these male job roles. One of those roles, which Norma stepped into, was working on airplanes. And believe it or not, she was working on the very first unmanned aircraft, aka drones. She would spray these aircraft with a fire retardant spray, but eventually she would be upgraded and moved over to actually constructing and building these drones called the OQ-2. Now, these drones weren't as exciting as you might think. They were just used for target practice. They could go up to 85 miles an hour, and they would basically just simulate enemy aircraft for training purposes of our soldiers. But it's while working on these drones that a guy named David Conover was rolling through, just taking photos, just stuff to showcase what was going on and how the women were stepping up doing these different job roles. And when he came across Norma, he was just struck with how gorgeous she was. So he snapped a couple of photos, and these are now very notorious photos of her actively working on these drones. And these photos would be the start of something major for her. Now, these photos were published in tons of different magazines, and their main intention was to boost morale for the war. This photographer, David Conover, brought these photos back to this guy named Bill Carroll. He approached him saying, yo, you've got to check out this model. She's gorgeous. Maybe she'd be perfect for what you're doing. Because he had just opened up this laboratory where he was processing this new kind of film called Ansco color film. It was something that they had just acquired from Germany, but he needed something to go on his business cards and his cards to showcase exactly what he was doing. And he thought that this girl, Norma Jean Dougherty, would be perfect. So this would set her up with her very first modeling gig, where she was getting paid. She was paid $20 whole for this photo shoot. That's pizza money. And these are the last known photos of Norma Jean Dougherty before she actually changed her name. She would get hired by Blue Book Modeling Agency. She would start modeling. She would be on the covers of different magazines, doing different roles. But eventually she would get picked up by 20th Century Fox because they wanted her to star in some movies and get some acting exposure. 20th Century Fox decided that Dougherty was too hard to pronounce, as I can fully attest to. Extremely confusing. It's a mouthful. So they decided to change her name to something that had a little bit more ring to it, flowed off the tongue a little better. And she really idolized Marilyn Miller, so she decided to take the name Marilyn. And her mother's side of the family's maiden name was Monroe. The whole alliteration thing, Marilyn Monroe, works perfectly. She had dyed her hair bleach blonde, and in 1946, she actually signed a contract with 20th Century Fox, which would begin her long acting career. Also in 1946, Marilyn and James Dougherty would get divorced because he didn't like that she was doing all these pinup photo shoots, and he didn't like or support her acting career. And this is likely because the executives at 20th Century Fox basically told her she shouldn't be with him because she can't afford to be pregnant. She had only signed a 6-month contract, and then after that, she wasn't really being promoted by 20th Century Fox, but she was still acting in different smaller roles. But this is why in 1949, she was pretty much at the end of her rope, super broke, Dr. Seuss. She ended up turning to doing these nude photos with Thomas Kelly. But then her acting career started to pick up just a little bit. She starred in movie roles in The Asphalt Jungle, as well as All About Eve, and we slowly started to see Marilyn becoming a more mainstream actress. But she was extremely annoyed with the fact she was getting typecast as this dumb blonde over and over again. She could not escape this dumb blonde pinup girl image. Now, the executives at 20th Century Fox, for whatever reason, did not like Marilyn Monroe. So they did not help promote her. They did not try and get her leading roles. And they continued to typecast her as this dumb blonde, not really going anywhere. That is until 1953, which is kind of strange. Out of nowhere, she blows up. She is chosen to be the star in this movie called Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And she also stars in another movie called How to Marry a Millionaire.
Stop Arabia, sir.
Now, 1953 is also when the first Playboy magazine features Marilyn Monroe. All of this publicity and the publicity about her in this calendar, and then her saying that it is in fact her in that calendar, you would have thought it would have killed her acting career.
I got so far behind the rent, 4 weeks, and I was in debt and everything, so I called up and I said, "Are you sure they won't recognize me?" He said, "I promise." I said, "Well, if it's at night and you don't have any helpers, to put up the lights," and I said, "I don't know." I said, "I'm shy and I don't want to expose myself to, all the people you have." And I said, "And at night?" He said, "All right, just Natalie and myself." So we did it. And that's all. He just spread out some red velvet. So it was very simple and drafty. By the time it was known, I was hired at Fox, rehired, and I remember they called on the set, the publicity department, and they said, "Did you pose for a calendar?" And I said, "Yes. Anything wrong?" Their voice says, "Don't say you did." I said, "But I did. I signed the release and I did, and I feel I should say it, so I did."
But it didn't. In fact, quite the opposite. Her sales of her movies spiked, and suddenly she was in these mainstream roles, she was in these feature roles, and she was an overnight sensation. Everybody loved Marilyn Monroe. 1953 is also the year that Marilyn's drug use really took a turn. Up until this point, she was taking sleeping pills so that she could sleep at night, and then in the morning, in order to be able to grind out the next day, chase these different roles, audition, just maintain the grind, she was then having to take these stimulants. But in 1953, she really started going down the barbiturate rabbit hole, and she would find herself becoming more and more addicted to these sleep medications, these super downers, And it got to the point where it just created this vicious cycle of uppers and downers on a constant basis. And it just so happened to coincide with her feature in Playboy magazine. I thought was kind of interesting. On January 14th of 1954, she would get married to legendary Major League Baseball player Joe Dimaggio. And them becoming a couple was obviously major news because they were both probably some of the hottest celebrities at that time. While the two of them were on their honeymoon in Japan, Marilyn would actually get booked to do a U.S. American troop tour where she would go around to different military bases and perform in order to boost morale. This would leave Joe Dimaggio alone on their honeymoon in Japan. This would be the first of many instances that would highlight just how tumultuous this relationship really was. Joe was extremely jealous. He did not like the fact that she was an international sex symbol. He did not support her acting or her modeling career. It made him extremely jealous. It wasn't until the movie The 7-Year Itch, when Marilyn was filming that famous scene where I think the subway goes by and her dress blows up, all the guys that were around during the filming of that scene were just like whistling and catcalling, and obviously it was a huge moment, a very iconic moment. Tons of photos were being taken, and Joe Dimaggio did not like that at all. Because the two of them were so high profile and were constantly the subjects of media scrutiny, and Joe was extremely controlling and very jealous, sometimes even abusive, they decided after 9 months of marriage that they would get a divorce. Maybe they weren't a good couple, but the two of them would remain friends until Marilyn's passing in 1962. It's actually said that he would send flowers to her grave multiple times a week for 20 years after she passed away. Man, Joe, talk about the one that got away, huh? But it's after this divorce that Marilyn's drug issues got way, way worse. Things got so bad, she actually had to start seeing a psychotherapist. Now, I did find it quite interesting that after starting this psychotherapy with a doctor named Marianne Criss, who has known ties to the depatterning facility known as the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic, shortly after that, she gets involved with this very famous playwright named Arthur Miller. And she had met him in like 1950, but nothing really happened at the time because he was married. But then when she got divorced from Joe Dimaggio and she was free to do her own thing again, she says that the attraction never died and the two of them linked up and got married. Because Arthur was Jewish, Marilyn decided to convert to Judaism, and he didn't ask her to convert. She just did it. So she's pretty easily programmable, is one way to look at it. They had a traditional Jewish ceremony and got married in 1956. Now, what's interesting about this Arthur Miller guy is that he was under constant FBI surveillance because he had known ties to different communist activist groups, as well as just the Communist Party in general. And at the height of the Cold War, with people freaking out about communism, he was like #1 suspect on their list for being surveillanced. And as you can imagine, Marilyn Monroe would then also be the subject of FBI surveillance because of her ties and her known connections with Arthur Miller, as well as her numerous trips to Mexico, her applications for different visas to be able to head over to the Soviet Union. Just seems really weird, like she does actually have ties and loyalty to the Communist Party. Things would really come to a head when Arthur Miller would apply for a visa to head over to England with Marilyn Monroe so that she could work on this movie called The Prince and the Showgirl. Now, when he applied for this visa, because of his known ties to the Communist Party, he was immediately flagged. That brought about these HUAC allegations, which stands for the House Un-American Activities Committee, basically just accusing him of treason working with the Communist Party. Now, it is speculated that Arthur Miller was a handler for Marilyn Monroe. I'm of the opinion that she was in fact placed there to spy on him because of his connections to the Communist Party. She was an asset. She was a sex kitten. She was in close, and she could easily get information out of him and relay this information back about what's going on with the Communist Party and what their plans are. And I think that is perfectly highlighted by the fact that she didn't distance herself from him when he was dealing with these communist allegations. In fact, she fully supported him all the way through, unless she was a CIA asset trying to infiltrate for intel. And this isn't just speculation. This was confirmed by the U.S. Embassy that she did in fact apply for this passport. Arthur and Marilyn's relationship was kind of a shit show. She would actually suffer 3 failed pregnancies, 2 of which were miscarriages. One of them would be an ectopic pregnancy because she struggled with endometriosis. Experiencing 1 failed pregnancy is probably traumatic enough, but 3 of them? This left Marilyn completely broken and spiraling even further into her use of these different barbiturates and these downers. It also led to things getting worse and worse between her and Arthur, but things really came to a head when she found a journal of his in which he had journaled about her really not meeting his expectations for being this massive sex symbol, and he also said that he was fairly embarrassed by her in front of his friends. As you can imagine, this thrust her further into a depressed state. She continued using and abusing these drugs worse and worse, all the way up through 1960. Throughout Marilyn's childhood, she never had a father figure, but she always said that she looked up to Clark Gable as a father figure, which is why she was amazingly stoked to start working on the movie The Misfits with Clark Gable. And this movie was also written by her husband, Arthur Miller. So all around, just an amazing production. She should be stoked to be on the set, and she gets to work with basically her dad, a lifelong father figure to her. And just a little fun fact for you guys about the movie The Misfits. They consider this movie to be cursed because 2 weeks after the filming of this movie wrapped up, Clark Gable passed away. And then 5 months before the premiere of this movie, Marilyn Monroe passed away. And this was also one of the very last films that a guy named Montgomery Clift had appeared in before he passed away. This film is cursed. During the filming of The Misfits, it was very obvious that Marilyn was struggling with her drug use. She couldn't remember lines, she was showing up sometimes, and if she did, she'd be late, and people were just saying that she was extremely difficult to work with, to the point where she actually got fired from the set. But Clark Gable said that he would not work with anybody else. Only Marilyn Monroe could be in that role. So they brought her back and finished the film with her. It was in 1961 that she would end up getting committed to a psychiatric facility just shortly after getting divorced from Arthur Miller in January of 1961. And this is entirely speculative, but a young lady named Frida Hull, who was friends with Marilyn Monroe, says that she has color photos of Marilyn being pregnant in late 1960. Now, this obviously led somewhat to the divorce with Arthur Miller, and supposedly Marilyn claims that the father of the baby would be a guy named Yves Montand. He was a co-star in the movie Let's Make a Move. They had a brief affair, and she claims that it was his baby.
You are the father!
However, Marilyn is also speculated to have been in an affair with John F. Kennedy around this same time frame.
You are not the father!
And she wasn't the only one. In fact, JFK had a reputation for sleeping around, I guess. There's speculation that this baby very well could have been John F. Kennedy's. It's the secret baby that led to the secret abortion in 1961. It is claimed that Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe, when they got divorced, they planned it around the inauguration of JFK because they thought it would take some of the media attention off of them. But we could look at this from another angle as well. She was admitted to this psychiatric facility under the guise of mental exhaustion, and people speculate that these 10 days where she was admitted to this facility very well could have been the same 10 days that she was actually getting this secret abortion taken care of. And it just also happens to coincide with JFK's inauguration, which would be a great distraction from something like Marilyn Monroe disappearing for 10 days. But like I said before, this Payne Whitney psychiatric clinic was a hotspot, and it was known for de-patterning of these different MK Ultra subjects. The other interesting piece about this Payne Whitney psychiatric clinic, Hugh Hefner's personal psychiatrist that we talked about last week, Dr. Joylin West, he completed his residency at this clinic, and he would go on to perform different experiments and testing. We also know from last week that he was a definite scientist involved in the MK-Ultra program, even running a clinic in the Haight-Ashbury area of San Francisco. And this is the clinic that Marilyn Monroe was committed to for a simple case of exhaustion, which is why people either speculate that Marilyn was being programmed at this facility, or this 10-day stretch was time enough for her to have this abortion and recover essentially without anybody knowing what happened, keeping JFK's secrets safe. The other interesting thing that happened to Marilyn after being admitted to this psychiatric clinic is that she was reassigned a new therapist once she left. This guy's name was Dr. Ralph Greenson. He ran in very similar circles to this Joylyn West doctor because they were both psychotherapists. They were both located in California. They both started their practice and started their medical journey in New York. And they were in the same small medical circle. So you'd imagine that the two of them knew each other, possibly worked together, especially with their ties to this psychiatric clinic. That is a known MK-Ultra clinic. And her being admitted comes at an all-time low. Her substance abuse has gotten out of control. She is now in one of the most depressed, lowest places she's been in due to all these failed pregnancies and feeling rejected, having 3 failed marriages. Altogether, she's just experienced so much trauma to the point where you could imagine she's been fully deprogrammed and she's now ready to be reprogrammed in order to infiltrate John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy's circles. Throughout 1961, Marilyn and JFK would have multiple casual sexual encounters. And some of the proof of this is there is multiple phone logs that were pulled from the White House that have incoming calls from Marilyn Monroe directly to this White House number.
The previous month, as we now know, Marilyn did make potentially embarrassing calls to the Justice Department. A telephone company executive, Robert Teox, told a local newspaper publisher what had happened.
He told me that he knew that the FBI had been into the general telephone offices and had taken the records of her calls that night.
Even more strange is there was a phone call that Jackie Kennedy had actually picked up. It was Marilyn calling, looking for JFK. This was a number that was like a secret number. Even the Secret Service didn't have this number. This was a secret private line directly to JFK, the President of the United States. And you can imagine it was a pretty awkward conversation when Jackie was talking to Marilyn. And it was shortly after that that Jackie told JFK, like, yo, you need to leave this girl alone. You need her out of your life. So that's when he fully cuts her off. And it's said that he passed her off onto his brother Bobby as a way to kind of get rid of her.
The Kennedy brothers continued to show what appeared to be a cavalier attitude towards women. Marilyn Monroe was no exception. John Danoff recalls that Jack Kennedy said that he was finished with Marilyn Monroe because of heat from J. Edgar Hoover. So reportedly, he came up with a solution.
He was tired of her, and he tried to give her, or he gave her, I understand he gave her to Bobby, because in the same time that she was making it with him, Bobby was also playing with her.
But JFK's a sneaky guy. When Jackie was in India, out of the country, he was going to take a little weekend trip at Frank Sinatra's house just to escape the, challenges of being president. They decided that Frank Sinatra had too many ties to the mafia, so there's no way he was going to stay at that house. And Bobby Kennedy advised, you should stay somewhere else. So he ended up staying at Bing Crosby's place, and for whatever reason, he invited Marilyn Monroe, and the two of them had a well-documented, very rarely disputed sexual encounter. It was during this encounter that JFK and Bobby decided that they should have Marilyn Monroe sing him happy birthday at their Democratic fundraising event where they were raising funds for his Democratic nomination. And if people didn't think something was going on with her and JFK before, they certainly did after this performance because, well, she sang happy birthday in probably the most intimate way possible.
Mr. President, the late Marilyn Monroe.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you. For
things you've done, the battles that you've won, and our problems by the ton. We thank you. Everybody, happy birthday.
It's after this whole birthday celebration party, whatever, that Marilyn Monroe is photographed in the only known picture of her, RFK, and JFK.
This is the only surviving photo of Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedys taken that night. Others were taken, but they were taken away.
We had the visit, and I don't know if it was the Secret Service or the FBI, but two men came and they said they would like to see our pictures. We showed them and they said, could they borrow them? They will return them later. And they took the pictures and they were never returned. And we asked for them and could never get them back.
And these were what pictures?
Specifically the pictures with Marilyn Monroe in them.
Throughout 1962, JFK had really distanced himself from Marilyn, but it said that Bobby Kennedy was really starting to get closer to her. And things got to the point where he actually said that he would leave his wife Ethel so that he could marry Marilyn. But when that didn't happen, she eventually started threatening that she was going to come out and expose her relationship with not just him, but the President of the United States, JFK. And this isn't just speculation. This was all released in a declassified CIA document, and it said that Marilyn was keeping a red diary, and she was basically just writing down all these things initially so she could kind of keep up with the conversation and know exactly what they were talking about and stay relevant. She actually documented some serious secrets about JFK and RFK, in particular their plans to take out Fidel Castro, as well as their ties to the mob in Chicago, in particular Sam Giancana. Apparently during Prohibition, Joseph Kennedy, which would be the patriarch of the Kennedy family, got involved with the mafia in Chicago as they were bootlegging moonshine and things like that. And these connections with the mob never went away. It's said that JFK was using these connections with the Chicago mafia to be able to win the state of Illinois, and that is one of the main reasons he actually got elected president, was because of this support. And of course, they were supporting him so that they would have some leniency on their operations once he was elected president. Once he actually got elected, though, he appointed his brother, Bobby Kennedy, to be the Attorney General. Almost like a stab in the back, the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, starts going after Sam Giancana and this Chicago mafia. Also included in these CIA documents is a redacted individual who claims that they have a considerable amount of information about these sex parties that the Kennedys would have with Marilyn Monroe and like 3 other redacted people at the Carlisle Hotel in New York City. So there is multiple CIA documents as well as FBI documents that implicate both Kennedys having a secret relationship with Marilyn Monroe. According to Marilyn's friend, Jean Carmen, she was hanging out with Marilyn and Bobby at Marilyn's house, and while she went to take a shower, Jean noticed that Bobby saw her red diary sitting on the table. He had picked it up, he looked at a couple pages, he seemed to immediately become irate. Bobby tried to get Marilyn to get rid of this diary, but she refused. And since he wasn't willing to marry her like he said he would, she actually threatened to open up about all these secrets. She even said that on August 6th, she's going to have a press conference, and she wonders just what the news and the news reporters would say if they were exposed to all of these secrets about the Kennedys.
There were lots of things in there about Castro, about the CIA, about Hoffa, about Bobby, about John Kennedy. She wrote down everything.
In fact, Carmen and wiretapper John Danoff report that Marilyn had told them that if Bobby Kennedy did not make a commitment to her, she would reveal her involvement with him and with his brother, John F. Kennedy. She had threatened to make the announcement on August 6th, a day after she died.
Evidence of Bobby Kennedy's liaison with Marilyn Monroe was confirmed by wiretaps. Those same wiretaps confirm that his brother, President John Kennedy, was also having an affair in 1962 with Marilyn Monroe.
One day when he was there, he found her diary on the table.
Marilyn's diary.
And then all of a sudden I see him getting livid.
Hey, Bobby.
Well, about that time, Marilyn came in and he said, Marilyn, what is this? And she said, oh, it's my diary. I want to remember, things so that I can talk to you about it later. He said, well, I don't, get rid of it. Get rid of it now. Get rid of it now.
Some pretty serious threats, for sure. And the secrets within this diary, according to this CIA document, are pretty serious. Not only did she know about the whole Fidel Castro thing, she also knew that JFK had been called out to Roswell to take a look at possible alien life forms, as well as this crashed spacecraft. Who knew that Marilyn Monroe was tied to Roswell and aliens? Who knew? Obviously, she knew about the mob stuff. It also documents their multiple different sexual experiences, so she has proof that they were having an affair. And more than anything, this CIA document actually confirms the existence of this secret diary, which is something that nobody's been able to pinpoint, nobody's been able to produce, and something that both the Kennedys really wanted to get their hands on. It's at this point that both Kennedy brothers completely distanced themselves from Marilyn. And the only reason that Marilyn was even able to get involved with the Kennedys in the first place was because she was best friends with Patricia Kennedy, who is their sister, and Patricia had married this guy named Peter Lawford. Peter was a trusted confidant and liaison for both the Kennedy brothers during JFK's presidency, and a lot of people speculate that he was actually in charge of setting up all these different sexual rendezvous that JFK had with all these different women, and one of those women just happened to be Marilyn Monroe. The last weekend of July in 1962, Frank Sinatra invites Marilyn Monroe to come out to his Cal-Neva lodge near Lake Tahoe for just like a getaway, a weekend getaway. And if we consider that not only does Frank Sinatra have ties to the mafia, but so do the Kennedy brothers, and we also consider that this weekend was entirely dedicated to drugging and putting Marilyn in these sexually compromising positions, taking photos of her, essentially gathering blackmail material, then it makes you wonder what the real motives were and who really set up this getaway weekend. On August 3rd, 1962, Marilyn goes to dinner with Peter Lawford and her publicist, Pat Newcomb. And during this dinner, an argument erupts, and it's based entirely around the Kennedys. Speculation says they were arguing about this whole diary situation and her plans to come forward on August 6th, exposing all of this information and exposing the Kennedys. Now, obviously, Peter is a trusted confidant to the Kennedys, and Marilyn's publicist, Pat Newcomb, is also friends and close with the Kennedys, because she was instrumental in working on his political campaign to be elected president. So word of her plans is obviously going to get back to the Kennedys. The other interesting thing that happened on August 3rd, 1962 was the creation of this CIA document that discusses all of the Kennedys' relations with Marilyn Monroe, as well as all of the secrets that were supposedly contained within this secret diary. So they knew about it on August 3rd, 1962. The morning of August 4th, 1962, Marilyn had actually allowed Pat Newcomb to stay over at her house after they had their whole dinner. The next morning when they get up, they start engaging in the same argument they were in the night before. It got so bad that Marilyn actually fired her as her publicist. Now, Dr. Ralph Greenson had appointed this housekeeper, Eunice Murray, to come in and basically just keep tabs on her 24 hours a day. She would stay there overnight. She actually kind of lived with Marilyn. And this seems like a gross overstepping of your doctor-patient relationship. Very handlery, if you ask me, Dr. Seuss. But Eunice Murray recalls that morning that Pat Newcomb and Marilyn were arguing over the Kennedy situation. At 11 a.m. that same day, a helicopter touches down at the Fox Studios lot, and out pops Bobby Kennedy, and he just disappeared into a limousine that was waiting for him.
Tipped off about Robert Kennedy's supposed helicopter flight, photographer Billy Woodfield drove out to Clover Field, the Santa Monica airport. He was going to see the owner of an air charter company often used by Peter Lawford.
He showed me his log. In the log, it showed that he had indeed picked up Bobby Kennedy at Peter Lawford's house on Sunday morning, somewhere around 2 o'clock. And he took him from Lawford's house to Los Angeles International Airport.
Bobby Kennedy's presence in Los Angeles on August 4th was also corroborated by former LAPD police.
Chief Parker told me confidentially that Bobby Kennedy was supposed to be north of Los Angeles, some city, making a speech, but that actually he said he was seen in the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles.
On the night that Marilyn died?
On the very night she died, yes.
So we've got pretty good evidence showing that Bobby did in fact arrive in LA that day. This is further corroborated by not only Eunice Murray, but also her son-in-law, Norman Jeffries. They both recall Bobby Kennedy showing up at about 3 to 4 p.m. at Marilyn's house. They were told that they need to leave while he was there, so they left for about an hour, and when they returned, Marilyn was in a completely distraught state. Completely distraught.
But two sources in Los Angeles say the Attorney General arrived by helicopter in early afternoon near the Beverly Hilton.
I was not at all surprised that the Kennedys were a very important part of Marilyn's life. And so that I was I wasn't included in this information, but I was a witness to what was happening.
And you believe that he was here that day?
At Marilyn's house?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
That afternoon?
Yes.
And you think that is the reason that she was so upset afterwards?
Yes, and it became so sticky that the protectors of Robert Kennedy, had to step in there and protect him.
Peter Lawford's neighbor in Santa Monica, Ward Wood, recalls the afternoon of Saturday, August the 4th.
The car drove up and then people got out and I said, oh, there's Bobby Kennedy, and they went from the car to the house. That really is all that I saw.
You're absolutely convinced it was Bobby Kennedy?
Oh, I know it was Bobby Kennedy, yeah.
No question of doubt in your mind?
This was further corroborated by her hairstylist, Sidney Juleroff, who had spoken to her on the phone, and she said that Bobby Kennedy had just come over, he had threatened her, and then he had left, leaving her scared for her life, essentially. But some of the best evidence to prove that Bobby Kennedy showed up that day is the fact that Marilyn had been under constant surveillance from the FBI for a while now because of her ties with Arthur Miller and the whole communist thing. So there was bugs in her house. They were constantly listening to what was going on there. John Danoff and Fred Otash were listening in to these recordings. They were listening to what's going on. And they specifically heard Bobby Kennedy show up, and they heard them arguing about this whole red diary thing and her not coming forward with exposing them, essentially. Sometime that afternoon, Dr. Greenson shows up. He tells Marilyn that she should take some of this Nembutal so that she can get a good night's rest and kind of relieve some of this anxiety. But I guess during this visit, Marilyn had told him that she was firing him from being her therapist anymore. So it seemed like she was really cleaning house at this point. Starting at about 7 p.m., Marilyn starts making tons of different phone calls to people. She talks to Joe Dimaggio about how he just broke up with his most recent girlfriend. She then speaks with her hairstylist again, Sidney Juleroff, and she tells him that she has a lot of really, really dangerous secrets on the Kennedys, which is pretty damning. She then calls her friend Jean Carmen, asking her to please come over and bring some sleeping pills with her, but she says, no, I'm not going to do that, and then after that, she starts refusing to answer any of Marilyn's phone calls. At about 9:30 p.m., the last phone call that Marilyn would make went out to a guy named Jose Bolaños, and this was supposedly her current boyfriend or recent boyfriend, and while she was on the phone with him, she had some pretty interesting things to say. She tells him that the information she has on JFK and RFK will literally shock the world. And most of the stuff that was in this diary is stuff that we would really find out eventually. It wasn't super, super hidden or stuff that would shock the world. But stuff about UFOs, alien activity, Roswell, this would be stuff that would shock the world. So was this what she was talking about? I don't know. During that conversation, somebody knocks on the door. Marilyn says she'll be right back. She sets the phone down, and then she never returns. But while the phone is set down, Jose can hear some sort of like scuffle or argument, something going on. And then someone randomly comes over and hangs up the phone without saying anything. Now, this has been confirmed by John Danoff, Fred Otash, Norman Jeffries, as well as Eunice Murray. They all say that Robert Kennedy showed back up with two unknown thugs, and they demanded entry into Marilyn's house. Now, Fred Otash and John Danoff actually hear the exchange that happened, and they say that they actually heard Marilyn Monroe being murdered. There was an argument between her and RFK, and at some point it sounds like they started smothering her with a pillow to try and keep her quiet because she was starting to freak out and get really loud. And then after that, they didn't hear anything at all from Marilyn Monroe. At 12:10 a.m. on August 5th, just shortly after this all happened, one of the most decorated LAPD police officers, named Lynn Franklin, actually stops a speeding Lincoln that's doing 75 in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. And the driver he actually recognizes as someone he knows, Mr. Peter Lawford. In the back seat, someone else that he recognizes, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. And in the passenger seat, kind of an interesting face that he recognizes, is Dr. Ralph Greenson. What are these guys doing hanging out together?
His name is Lynn Franklin. He retired as the most decorated police officer in Beverly Hills history. Mr. Franklin, welcome. Mr. Franklin, you say that not only was Bobby Kennedy in Los Angeles that night, but you pulled over his car for speeding.
Yes, I did. I stopped a late model Lincoln traveling through Beverly Hills eastbound on Olympic Boulevard at about 75 miles an hour in a 25-mile zone.
Who was in the car, sir?
Driving the car was Peter Lawford, whom I'd known for a number of years, and seated in the front seat with him was a man that I later identified as Dr. Greenson, Marilyn Monroe's psychiatrist, and in the back seat was the Attorney General Bobby Kennedy.
How'd you know he was in the back seat?
Peter Lawford, I asked him why I'm driving so fast, and he said, I'm trying to get the Attorney General. He looked over his shoulder to the Hilton Hotel to pick up his luggage. He has to fly out of town. And I shined my flashlight back in the back seat into the Attorney General's face and recognized him.
What was their general demeanor?
They appeared to be uptight, like they were in a hurry to get somewhere, and actually doing 75 miles an hour in a 25 zone, but they were uptight.
Didn't look like three gentlemen out on the town for fun.
No, they didn't.
Now, may I ask, did you receive a visit from the Secret Service after the traffic stop?
Yes, I did. A few days later, I received information that Bobby Kennedy had denied he was even in the L.A. area, that he was in San Francisco, so I thought, hey, there's something wrong here. Sort of, for my own curiosity, I went to the Hilton Hotel and checked out and found that he was registered there that particular night. I received a copy of the registration. A few days later, the chief called me into the station, and two Secret Service guys were there, and they demanded the copy of the registration that I had picked up at the hotel. I said, hey guys, go get your own line.
Well, what happened to that copy that you had?
Short while later, it came up missing from my files, stolen.
Even more damning, Peter Lawford tells Lynn Franklin that they're in a hurry to get Bobby Kennedy to the airport so he can get out of town. Why was he in such a hurry? Now, there are a few discrepancies and facts that just raise a lot of suspicion and questions about this whole situation. One of the biggest ones, though, is the timeline inconsistencies. The official story given to us from Eunice Murray, the housekeeper who worked for Dr. Greenson, was that she noticed at 3:30 a.m. Marilyn's light was still on in her room, which she found to be really weird. And even though she had a key to the house because she lived there and she could likely get into that room no problem, she decided to walk around to the outside window, peek inside, and see what was going on. That's when she noticed that Marilyn looked like she was out, unresponsive. She freaked out and she calls up Dr. Greenson right away. Once Dr. Greenson arrives, he realizes the direness of the situation. He pulls out this syringe with a giant needle on it. Assuming that it's adrenaline, he injects her right in the heart with this syringe. They continue performing CPR until Dr. Greenson finally says, it's useless, she's gone, officially.
Schaefer's Unit 88, respond to unconscious person. 12305, Elena.
In the early morning hours of August 5th, 1962, the Schaefer Ambulance Service radioed one of its ambulances to go to Marilyn Monroe's home. Driver James Hall claims he answered that call and arrived at her house at 3:30 a.m.
Marilyn was in the bedroom laying on the bed. At that point, in trying to determine what was wrong with the patient, we ascertained that her breathing was very shallow. Her pulse was very weak and rapid, and she was unconscious at that time. We did what we could to save her, and I believe we could have saved her if we'd had the opportunity to take her to the hospital. But the doctor arrived before we could go.
What happened?
A man entered her house and stated that he was her doctor, and at that point, if there's a doctor, the doctor becomes in charge.
And what was his name?
Ralph Greenson.
Greenson. Now, what did he do? Tell me.
Oh, he started to give her the CPR, and he administered an injection, which I assumed to be adrenaline because I've seen the procedures before.
You assumed it was adrenaline, and you saw the injection. Which part of the body did he inject this adrenaline into?
Injected it into her heart.
And when he removed that syringe, right?
Yeah.
What happened then?
Then we continued with the CPR for about another 3 to 5 minutes. And then he put his stethoscope on her and he said, "I'm going to pronounce her dead, you can leave."
Was she dead?
She was dead then, yes.
Were you surprised?
No, but I was sick.
What do you mean you were sick?
Well, you know, we had her saved. She was saved. If that guy hadn't walked in, I'd have had her to the hospital. She'd be alive today.
Many, many years later, Eunice Murray would come out and say that she actually found Monroe's body closer to midnight, which throws off the timeline yet again.
Who found the body?
I did.
I asked who discovered the scene. Mrs. Murray said that she did. And I said, well, tell me about it. This is Mrs. Murray's story to me. She said...
When I went to bed about 10 o'clock, saw the light into Marilyn's door, and I just thought she was talking on the telephone to her friends. I went to bed. About midnight, I got up and went down the hall to the bathroom, and the light was still on. So I knocked on her door, and she didn't answer. So I was concerned, and I called Dr. Greenson.
When Jack Clemens shows up on the crime scene, he comes upon Eunice Murray doing laundry. Tell me that's not suspicious. Was she covering up evidence? Or was she just cleaning things up because she was so distraught she didn't know what to do with herself and she wanted to tidy up the crime scene for all the incoming press? I don't know, but it's weird.
Clemens also said that when he arrived, Eunice Murray was washing something in the washing machine, and that was suspicious.
The implication is that she was destroying evidence. As the first responding officer, he did not further investigate what she was washing. He also did not issue any reports regarding this suspicion. A full inventory of Marilyn's estate was completed at the time of her death. A washer and dryer is not indicated in that inventory.
And even crazier, the Schaefer ambulance service that serviced that local area, 2 of the ambulance drivers recall not only getting the phone call about Marilyn Monroe, but then they showed up and they say they actually took her while she was still alive to the hospital, which is where she ended up passing away.
I asked them very pointedly why it took from midnight, approximately midnight or 12:30 till about 4:30 to call the police. I'm standing looking at 2 doctors, both of whom know that this is what we call a coroner's case. They know they have to notify the police, and it takes them 4 hours to get around to it.
So what happened in the missing 4 hours? Far from being discovered dead, he says, Marilyn was still alive when the ambulance arrived.
We took Marilyn Monroe in on an overdose, and of course she succumbed at the hospital.
You mean that you were called to the house and you took her alive in coma?
In coma, yes. She was completely out.
This would mean that her body had to be brought back to her house and then staged in her bed, which is seeming more and more possible, especially considering that they supposedly found her body, gave her this adrenaline shot, and then started performing CPR. But her body was found face down in this bed with her hand grabbing this phone. According to Dr. Greenson, he was trying to wean her off of these Nembutal pills, and she also had another doctor, it was like her regular physician, who was still prescribing her these Nembutal pills. In order to get her off of these pills, Dr. Greenson was prescribing her chloral hydrate, which is very similar, but if you mix the two, it can be deadly.
Interview with Dr. Hyman Engelberg. There were apparently quite a volume of pills that were discovered at her death at her bedside.
Yes.
Do you recall looking at a list of those pills, and were they all prescribed by you?
No, only one had been prescribed on me. I was surprised to see at the side of her bed a large number of other sleeping pills. I knew nothing about any chloral hydrate. I never used chloral hydrate.
So you wrote her prescription for Nembutal only?
That was it. It's the only prescription I wrote.
According to Dr. Greenson, he had told Dr. Hyman Engelberg to not prescribe her any more Nembutal because he was switching her to chloral hydrate. But apparently he didn't actually say that. And next to her bedside on the nightstand was tons of these pill bottles, and the Nembutal that she had just filled was completely gone. So they assumed that she had taken all of those pills. But they found no water, no cups, no nothing next to the bed. At least not initially. The first officer to respond not only noted that the scene looked really, really staged, but he noted that there was no glass of water, there was no liquids at all for her to ingest all of these pills with. And I mean, think about it. Think about taking 40 pills. Like, you're going to need a lot of water for that. That is going to be a lot of work, and that sounds pretty unbearable to do, if I'm being honest.
Jack Clemens was the first responding officer to the death scene. Many years later, Clemens stated that the scene seemed staged.
Marilyn was stretched out, face down, in a soldier's position, catty-corner of the bed. Obviously, she'd been placed in that position. And I was shown a nightstand by her bed, and it was about 8 or 10 empty bottles that had contained medicine, all barbiturates. Dr. Greenson said she must have swallowed them all. I looked in the bathroom for a half-empty glass or a glass that had been used. There was none.
If we look at these photographs, which were taken hours later, and multiple people had been walking around that crime scene and were able to do whatever they really wanted, there is in fact a cup next to the bed. This cup was never admitted into evidence. Later on, I guess all these things from Marilyn Monroe would get auctioned off, and the cup in this photo is actually a part of a set of cups. The cups, when they were sold to whoever ended up buying them, they said that there was one cup missing. And it just so happens to be that very same cup we see in this photo.
And clearly you can see a drinking vessel. In fact, it's believed to be one of a series of 12 vessels which she purchased in Mexico. There is a collector who owns these drinking vessels, and one of them is missing.
But not only was there no water for her to take all of these pills, but during the autopsy, there was no pills located in her stomach. None. There wasn't even any yellow residue to show that these pills were in her system. And I guess they've done tests later on to show that these pills really do dissolve extremely quickly. But if she took that many pills, you would have to imagine something that has a known side effect of nausea and vomiting. At that high of a dose, she would be throwing up all over the place, especially if she was overdosing. And then couple that with the fact that there was no trace of these pills located in her system, but there was traces of these substances in her bloodstream as well as in her liver. It seriously makes you wonder how she was poisoned with this stuff. How did she get it into her body? Many people have speculated that maybe she didn't ingest them. She was actually given a shot, but the autopsy would show that there was no puncture wounds on her body anywhere. But I found that kind of interesting because Dr. Greenson very pacifically said he came in and gave her a shot to the heart of adrenaline, and yet there's no puncture wound for that. There was also bruises on her upper and lower back, and typically that is associated with possible puncture sites, places where someone was injected with something. So you can't completely rule out injection, but according to the autopsy, they did. But because of the lack of puncture wounds and residue in her stomach from these pills, people are wondering how'd she get this into her system. And I guess for actresses at the time, it was a pretty normal thing for them to use enemas to help them maintain their weight. And for Marilyn in particular, she had a heavy addiction to these downers, these barbiturates, and prescription meds. And one of the major symptoms that we know from Elvis especially is constipation. So these enemas can help keep you cleaned out and help you keep moving things through the system. So a lot of people have speculated that she had an enema in her home because it was a regular thing she did. So perhaps this enema was given to her with these substances inside. This would completely bypass her stomach, get it into her bloodstream directly, and would have a really quick reaction. Within like 30 to 45 minutes, she would probably have been passed away. The evidence from the autopsy to support this theory is the fact that her colon had a purplish discoloration, and that usually is from some sort of irritation, something having been inserted inside of you there. So many people believe that this is the enema that caused this discoloration. In order to test this, Dr. Noguchi sent off all of her organs to a lab for testing, and mysteriously all of those organs and samples just disappeared, vanished into thin air. Quite conveniently, I might add.
Noguchi later sent organ specimens for microscopic analysis. but the specimens were destroyed before the tests were done.
What happened to the medical photographs that were taken?
I have no idea.
Why wouldn't Noguchi say that this is a jigsaw puzzle and there are about a dozen pieces that are missing?
It's like a jigsaw puzzle. There are 100 pieces. Perhaps a dozen pieces are missing.
The other thing these ambulance drivers say when they picked up Marilyn Monroe is that they were actively working on getting her stable and they were about to transfer her to the hospital when Dr. Greenson showed up. He refused to allow anybody to transfer her or do anything to her until he had a chance to contact Fox and figure out what they wanted to do in terms of the publicity. Then he gave her this adrenaline shot in the heart, and then shortly after that, she was unresponsive. Many people believe that this shot he gave her wasn't actually adrenaline. It was something else.
And I went to the studio and I said, listen, we got to postpone this picture. I don't think she's going to be ready. We're going to start shooting in about 3 weeks. And said, what happened? She said, oh, no, you're being melodramatic. I said, I tell you, the girl is not able to do this yet. I said, if I came and told you she just had a heart attack, what would you do? She said, well, we would wait. I said, what's the difference? He says, she had a heart attack. We couldn't get insurance. With this, we can.
But because of his intervention, she ended up passing away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Now, this is all very speculative because we really don't know exactly what happened that night. There's so many conflicting stories, so many conflicting timelines. It's just all up in the air. Now, there's a lot of things that are suspicious about this whole situation, but there's two things that really caught my attention. Number one, Bobby Kennedy's alibi. Apparently, he says he was staying in Northern California with his lawyer friend, John Bates. But John Bates, strangely enough, is also seen working as an attorney for Sam Giancana, who is a leader and major member of the mafia. Also, he is one of the major targets that Bobby Kennedy was targeting with his whole push to crack down on organized crime after being appointed the attorney general. So if he's going after this guy and he's the reason why this guy is in court, then why is he also staying at this lawyer who's representing him's house? Makes no sense. Also, we have multiple reports of people who say that they for sure saw Bobby Kennedy in Los Angeles at the time that Marilyn Monroe was killed. The other piece was the former coroner's aide, a guy named Lionel Grandison. He says that he was not only forced into signing off on the death certificate, even though he did not want to sign off on it because it said that it was a self-exit, and he didn't believe that it was, but he also recalls seeing the red diary admitted into evidence. He says that he had looked through it briefly, and one of the things he had noticed that really stood out to him was the discussion that Marilyn Monroe had had with JFK and RFK about taking out Fidel Castro.
I sent the drivers to her house to pick up any property or any information that would lead us to the next of kin. They came back with a book, the infamous Little Red Book. The book didn't have any references to any next of kin, but it had a very interesting series of stories, of assessments, of evaluations about things that were apparently going on in her life. John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, mafia, those kinds of catchphrases. I mean, they were something to consider. They were something to look a little more thoroughly at and see what she was saying. I saw the book that Monday. We locked the property back up in the safes that Monday evening. That Tuesday, it was gone. Never to be seen again, at least in Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, to my knowledge.
Now, I thought it was really weird because there's no way for him to have known that the CIA documents that they had just created knew about this red diary containing information about taking out Fidel Castro. This didn't get released until very recently, and yet he knew about this stuff during the autopsy. So that kind of corroborates the existence of this red diary. However, it disappeared, never to be seen again. And it's never been produced, nor has anybody been able to prove the existence of this diary. Oh, and I guess there was one more piece that really struck me pretty hard. And that's the fact that she was found naked in bed. Why do all of these celebrities and famous people always die naked? Drop it in the comments, let me know. Now, you guys might find it very interesting, like I did, to know that this Lionel Grandison guy decided to leave 1 month after all of this happened. He just decided to quit. He actually got charged with stealing a credit card from a corpse, and he pled guilty to it. Now, Mr. Grandison had been making a stink about missing information, missing toxicology reports. There was allegedly a self-exit note found at the scene that was clearly a phony note and was never admitted into police evidence. So he was raising hell about all of these inconsistencies, and he believes that these charges put on him for this fraud using this credit card was retaliation or a way to get back at him or keep him quiet for asking these questions and bringing this information to light. So I don't know, you guys. Nothing really feels right about this being labeled a self-exit, especially with all of the evidence condemning the Kennedys. And if we think about it in terms of her being a sex kitten, maybe this was her entire goal. She accomplished her mission, and it was after this that they realized they needed to get rid of her. She knew too much at this point. And she was starting to lose herself to these drugs, and she was becoming a serious liability. And I think the other interesting piece about this whole sex kitten thing is just how many other sex kitten celebrities seem to follow this very same blueprint. And all of them seem to pay some weird homage to Marilyn Monroe in some way. And this is just another little fun fact for you guys. Hugh Hefner is in fact buried in the tomb right next to Marilyn Monroe. He said he wanted to do that because, well, there would be no Playboy without Marilyn Monroe. If the Playboy operation was entirely focused on creating these sex kittens for MKUltra, then, yet again, he owes everything to Marilyn Monroe, his entire sex kitten operation. So, just some food for thought, really.
I will be buried as well in the vault immediately next to hers. The fact that I will be residing to eternity next to her seemed very appropriate.
And though Marilyn is said to have gotten herself into this deep, dark addiction, I'm really curious what Dr. Greenson's role really was in this, because things really took a dark, dark turn once she got admitted to that psychiatric clinic and then came out and was even more heavily medicated than she'd ever been before. Plus, why was Dr. Greenson spotted by Lynn Franklin, the police officer who pulled over Bobby Kennedy and Peter Lawford? Why was this doctor with those guys? And why did Dr. Greenson very suspiciously inject Marilyn with some unknown substance with an already prepared needle that he never identified as adrenaline or as anything, and then mysteriously she ends up unresponsive after that? This Greenson guy is extremely suspicious, but the most suspicious thing about him is Box 29. Box 29 is a collection of different documents put together by Dr. Greenson. It has been sealed and locked away, not to be opened until January 1st of 2039. So if there's nothing incriminating about Marilyn Monroe and what happened to her, then why is this box locked away and sealed until 2039, which would be a year when pretty much Dr. Greenson and his entire family would no longer be around to experience any of the scrutiny? And the contents of this box have been briefly looked at by a couple of different people, but they were only given limited access. They couldn't take photos or make any copies of anything. All they could do was write down what they were seeing and what was in there. And they had a very limited time frame to do it before it actually got locked away. And what they said they saw in there was very interesting information, all related to Marilyn Monroe. So in 2039, I'm really excited to see what happens when these documents are declassified. This is extremely reminiscent of the second autopsy that was done on Elvis Presley and then was sealed for 50 years. We won't know what happened until 2027, 2 more years. So a lot of good things to look forward to, you guys. I want to know what you guys think, though. Drop it in the comments. Maybe there's another theory I didn't even talk about. Drop it in the comments. Or maybe you just think that she passed away from not being able to handle life anymore. She was overwhelmed. Things were going so badly. She finally was ready to just end it all. This wasn't her first time trying it. It happened before, according to Dr. Greenson.
Were you aware of other suicide attempts that she had made prior to her death?
I'm not aware of any deliberate suicide attempts. I was only aware of the one time when she apparently had too much to drink and had taken possibly slightly more than she should have. But that was not a serious attempt.
But I appreciate you guys chilling, hanging out with me, listening for this long. I look forward to doing this again with you guys next week for another one. But until then, sleep safe, stay sober, and question everything. Hasta la vista, sobers.
Let's go.